Good morning, everyone. Good morning, good morning. This is the Early Career Ocean Professionals Program, the Africa Nodes, opening up this awesome webinar about women, just to celebrate International Women's Day. Last month, actually, we were a little bit behind the schedule, but we managed to organize this awesome webinar for all of you. I'm pleased to invite a group of awesome women and very talented women today to be as speakers and participating in this engaging discussion, and also highlighting a few of the challenges that we women in Africa have at the moment in our careers as researchers, not only as ocean professionals. Just to quick reminders, please, those that are not speaker, keep your video off and your audio, and we're gonna have space for you to have your questions raised during the Q&A session. Just before we start, I'm just going to give you a brief overview about the webinar. So we're going to introduce the Mawazo Institute, which is the one who undertook the survey on the status of African women in research in Africa. And we're going to have two key speakers from Mawazo Institute here today. I'm going to give you a brief short bio about them just now. And after that, we're going to invite Dr. Fiona, who is the CEO of Mawazo Institute. She's going to give an overview about the institute and possible opportunities for African women ECOPs. We're going to then move to the main presentation on the webinar with Aisha, who is going to provide us with all the details about the report that was released recently by Mawazo Institute on the status of African women in research. After that, we're going to invite then Dr. Melissa, who is from South Africa, and she's going to be one of the discussants about the findings of this report, and we have an enriching discussion surrounding that. And finally, we're going to have a possibility of the audience to engage with us in the Q&A session of 15 minutes. So we can just raise your hand if you like to place your question, and we're going to be very happy to discuss with you and get suggestions and comments about our webinar. And at the end, we have a surprise for all the attendees. We would like to implement a quick survey from the ECOP program Africa Nodes to understand better about what you would like to see as the ECOP program and member of the ECOP program in terms of women representation, gender inclusion, and so on. So we have going to be implement these 10 questions as a survey at the end. I will really appreciate if you can answer that, and we can discuss at the end the survey results and see how we can improve our commitment to gender inclusion and gender equality within the program, ECOP program. And at the end, then we're going to say bye-bye to everyone. So thank you so much for everyone for attending this today. I'm going to start then talking about the Mawazo Institute. So for those who don't know, Mawazo Institute is a women-led Africa organization based in Nairobi, Kenya, supporting early career women researchers, not only related to the oceans, as they work to find solutions to local and global development challenges. Mawazo believes that African women conducting PhDs are driven, creative, analytical, and critical thinkers. As an African woman, they bring a unique and often forgotten perspective and voice to research and development. They believe that the women hold the key to driving innovative, holistic, sustainable development on the continent and beyond. So that's the Mawazo Institute. They're very interesting institute. I'm going to ask Fiona and Aisha, please, to share the website of Mawazo Institute in the chat, please, for our attendees to check it out. And also a copy of the report, if you can, in the chat. Just continue by equipping early career African women research with essential non-technical skills, mentorship, and funding support from the Mawazo Institute, such as the Mawazo Fellowship Program, and using public engagement as well as strategic communications and partnerships with both academic and non-academic partners, such as the Mawazo Voices programs. The Institute can create and facilitate opportunities for other women, the African women, to become thought leaders and change makers in critical fields and sectors. So welcome, Mawazo Institute, a key partner now from the ECOP Africa Node. I'm very welcome to have them with us in this webinar. Now I'm going to introduce to you the CEO from Mawazo Institute, which is Dr. Fiona Moejes. Forgive me, Fiona, if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly, but just correct me, please, if it's Moejes, the surname. And so she's the CEO of the Mawazo Institute, and she supports African women researchers to lead knowledge generation and innovation and shape policy across 26 African countries. She co-founded Mawimbi Ocean Innovations, promote climate resilient coast economies through an innovative seaweed farming model. She got a PhD in microalgae biotechnology from the University of Düsseldorf in Germany and a master's degree in biological science from the University of Sheffield in the UK. Dr. Moejes integrates science, policy, and entrepreneurship to foster long-term transformative change. A Woman for the Environment African Fellow and 2025 Prometheus X Prize awardee. She champions holistic innovation and evidence-based solutions, shapes Africa's future through inclusive leadership. Our next speaker is Dr. Aisha Mugo, who is a research officer at the Mawazo Institute. She's going to be the one today presenting the results of the report from Mawazo Institute. She contributes to projects to amplify African women voices in research and policy. She has worked on key innovatives like the Status of African Women in Research report and the Emerging Trends in Research sector briefs, which highlight critical insights on gender and research trends across the continent. Aisha is passionate about using data-driven research for policy and create equitable opportunities for African women in academia and beyond. Finally, our last speaker today is Melissa Boonzaaier Davids. She's a South African marine biologist, marine invertebrate specialist, and science communicator. She serves on the board of Cape Winelands Biosphere Reserve, the Zoological Society of Southern Africa, and the International Bryozoological Association. Melissa has worked on invasive species, sea turtles, marine animals, abalone, and polychaete worms. She worked as an assistant curator at the ECOP Africa Museum, while pursuing her doctoral studies focused on marine bryozoans. With over 10 years of curatorial experience, her affiliation with the ECOP Museum sparked her passion for natural history collections and public engagement. In 2022, Melissa became a National Geographic Explorer, received the John Allen Foundation grant for a curatorial program. In 2023, she became Global Second-Back Fellow and received the Ernest May grant for bryozoa research in Germany. Melissa today is a balloon scientist of the Department of Forestry, Fisheries, and the Environment in South Africa, Cape Town. And she's, of course, an honorary research associate of ECOP Museums of South Africa. And at the moment, Melissa is undertaking a survey about the role of women at the ECOP South Africa Museum throughout 200 years of history of this museum. So I'm very welcome to have all these amazing women here today. Thank you so much for accepting to participate in this webinar. I now call, please, Dr. Fiona. Please, Fiona. You're welcome to start. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction to our work and who we are at Mawazo. I think I want to just spend a little bit more time going a little bit more into what Mawazo is all about. My name, for the pronunciation, it's Fiona Wanjiku Moejes. So it's Moejes is my surname. But it's really just such a pleasure and an honor to be part of this webinar and to speak a little bit more about what we do and the role and critical role women play in research. I also have a little bit of a bias because of my background in the marine space, so I'm doubly excited to be able to help deliver this webinar to a growing network of wonderful ocean scientists. So thank you. First of all, thank you so much for having us. So I think Sarah talked a little bit already about what we do, but maybe I can go into a little bit more detail and Mawazo's story. And I want to start by the name, because names are important and names say a lot about things. And so the name Mawazo, for those of you who are on the webinar that can speak Swahili, when we talk about Mawazo in Swahili, Mawazo can mean ideas or thoughts, but it sometimes has a negative connotation to it, particularly for women. So women can have a lot of mawazos, that we are ruminating and thinking a lot about things in our head, and there's a lot going on up in our minds. And what Mawazo is doing is basically reclaiming that, because we do in fact have a lot of ideas and thoughts in our minds that are incredibly powerful when given the right opportunities and the right resources for impact. And so the Mawazo Institute does exactly that. We are taking ideas, taking research, taking evidence, taking information, and translating and finding ways to translate it into impactful solutions for the continent and beyond. And we say beyond because I believe a lot of the solutions we can create here are definitely applicable elsewhere. So it's really from Africa to the world is our thinking. And so we are working with women and we have a theory. And our theory really of why we work particularly with African women is because they have this really unique perspective on life. And often that perspective is missing in the evidence generation, knowledge generation space. And we need it, because we need it in order to create solutions that are really tailored to the real needs to the people of to not only the people, the nature, the natural resources of the continent. And so what we do is essentially, whilst we do work with women researchers, the reason is bigger. It's not just about the women. It's about the bigger story and the bigger journey and the longer journey that we're on to make Africa reach its full potential and become what it should be. And so we meet women at the PhD level. Again, a theory why we work at the PhD level. And the theory is that we really believe that when you're doing a PhD, and for those of you who are joining us who are currently undertaking or have completed a PhD, it is grueling. It is a long journey. It is hard. But it really creates a way of thinking. So because you have to delve so deep into information, and you have to be able to analyze and critically look at information and in a completely different depth than that you would compare to your master's, for example. And we really believe that those kind of minds that think like that think deeply and critically about information and data are really critical to driving decision-making beyond the research space, into policy, into industry, and so forth. Particularly for women going through the PhD process. And Aisha is going to go into more and more information about the realities. But for women going through it, it really requires them to be really gritty, really kind of feisty to get through the process of finishing your PhD. Often and we work with women at institutions on the continent, and our institutions sometimes are lacking a lot of resources, and so they're going through this process in a doubly hard way, and so getting through it makes them extremely driven. And so we need women who are so grounded and driven and believe so deeply in their research ideas that they're willing to go through the PhD process because they believe in this idea that they have. And so we really believe that these women can be really incredible change makers for the continent, given the right opportunities, given putting them in the right places, giving them the right kind of visibility so that the world can know about them and their research. And so what we do, we work through, and I think Sarah mentioned them in the introduction, we have two main programs. The first is the fellowship program. It's our flagship program. It's the one that started this whole journey of Mawazo. And our fellowship program basically brings on board African women researchers who are current PhD students at institutions on the continent in that can work in anything. So we're not focused in any specific area. We really allow PhDs from from math to engineering to governance to education to gender and so forth. And the reason for that is because our problems and the solutions we need for the continent are so broad. And so we wanted to leave it open. And so we're completely, not focused on any specific discipline in terms of the women that we support. But the thing that they do have in common is that all of them have an idea that can have quite an impactful, quite an impact on a critical issue on the continent. And so that is the thing that kind of ties all of the women together. So even though they're from different disciplines, they all have really, really big ideas for something to change, you know, on the continent. And so when they come on board, we deliver our training through an e-learning platform that we call the Mawazo Learning Exchange Platform. And we deliver training in things that are not at all technical. So we don't do any kind of methodologies or anything like that. But we really curated a curriculum that focuses on giving them the tools they require to first of all, get to the end of their PhDs, but go beyond that and really translate their research and their ideas into action. So these are things like budgeting and financial management, grant writing, policy engagement, public engagement for researchers. We have a personal leadership course. We do 2 courses that are focused on allowing them to do good, like really solid framing of their research. So we focused on climate change as one being a global issue and gender being a global issue as well. So even if you're a chemist in the lab and you think your research will never have anything to do with, gender or climate change, we really try to teach them ways to frame their research into these big lenses, because these lenses are important, especially if you're wanting to get your research out there and you want your research to have impact. The training is complemented with a mentorship program. So we match all of our fellows to mentors that suit their needs. So we do a really, really kind of like detailed matchmaking between the mentors and the mentees, because some of our fellows don't need more technical support. They've got a great supervisor. They just need somebody who can give them career guidance, especially being women, balancing all of their different responsibilities. Sometimes all they need is somebody who can guide them on how to do that better. We then also have a fund, because funding, and Aisha will talk about that more in the results of our report, but funding is a really big issue. It's probably one of the main hurdles that really slows down the completion time for PhDs for women, because 60% of women are paying for their PhDs out of their pocket. And when you have to think about whether you're going to do this experiment or send your kids to school, it's your children are always going to win that argument. And so they're having to delay their PhD progress because of lack of funding. And so we have a pot of money that's quite flexible, in the sense that it can be used for anything you feel you need to move closer to get to the end of your PhD. So you can use it for field studies, for publishing papers, for going to a conference, to buying equipment. It's really flexible. And this money goes directly to the women. So they don't have to go through the bureaucratic process within their universities to access the money. But the journey doesn't stop there. So after 15 months of this training and sort of like almost preparing and incubating with the women over 15 months, we continue to walk with them. So beyond the fellowship program, we have what is called the Voices program. It's kind of a broad program in terms of like it houses many different activities, but in essence, it's really where our alumni, we create all types of ways to support our alumni. And so some of the really critical things that we do with them are continue access to funding. So we do have a separate fund for all of our alumni. So even after the fellowship program, they can receive access to funding to support their research. 1, to finish the PhD, but 2, to now more and more get involved in like research translation activities. So whether that's community engagement activities, or if it is helping to write policy briefs, doing workshops. We've had fellows who've used it to do market research for a potential product that they might be able to have ready for market. Conferences has always been one, traveling with their children to go to different opportunities. So this is the fund that continues to help them. Beyond that, we do continuous support. So we connect them to strategic partners that can help them to like accelerate their process in terms, if they have a startup. We connect them to policy actors. We connect them to people within the development sector as well. to basically whatever they need to really translate their research into action. And the way that we drive that process is to do what we call a commitment to action document. And it's a short, it's like a page and a half. It just has a bunch of questions. And at the end of the fellowship program, each woman fills it out. And at the end, it's basically a statement that says, I'm committed to working with ECOP to improve researchers in the marine space in Africa. And so then we get those commitments to action, and they act like a roadmap. So we know that this person wants to work with a specific organization, or they want to work with a policy maker, and we can start to build those connections for them and facilitate the connection with those people, with those organizations or people. And then we do a lot of visibility work, because oftentimes this is really critical and a really critical catalyst to get them to do all the things they want to do with their research. So we get them to get them into traditional media. So this is local newspapers, TV, really just trying to get them and their expertise out there so that public perception of what a researcher and an expert looks like can start to shift as well. And also they're the ones people call upon now. So we've had instances of one of our fellows being called the night before to go into Parliament to help draft the robotics and AI bill in Kenya. So because of something that we've done in the past where she had visibility and this person got to know who she was. And so visibility and communication and kind of like creating visibility for these women is a critical component of what we do too. But yeah, so this is basically our main programming that we do, and really we are always learning and researching. And what Aisha runs within the organization is all of our research work, because everything we do is embedded in like the actual need of the women we support and the need of the broader knowledge generating and innovation ecosystem, because that's at the end of the day why we're doing this, because we want research and evidence to drive development on the continent, but we need all the voices to be there and all of the ideas to be there, and so that's kind of our approach and our belief on how we can do that. But yeah, you can find out more. You can reach out to us if you want to find out more. Our fellowship program at the moment, we are going to be onboarding our 4th cohort, and we'll be opening up calls for applications again next year for the next cycle. So we run every 2 years, the cycle of our fellowship program. But please do feel free to reach out. We're always open to building our network. We're always looking for new connections and things like that across the continent and beyond. So do feel free to reach out to find out more about what we do and the women we support and their research. Excuse me. And so, yeah, really glad to be here. It is a pleasure, and it's my honor to now hand over to Aisha, who's going to take us through the findings of our report. Actually, I didn't even talk much about our reports. I don't know, Aisha, if you want to do that. Pardon?
I can take it away, but of course, maybe at the end, if there's anything you'd want to add as we maybe answer some questions, we can do that.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Fiona. Thank you so much. Very interesting to know a little bit more about Mawazo Institute. It's so excited to hear about the objectives and the projects that Mawazo Institute is undertaking. So girls, please don't waste your time. Visit Mawazo Institute website, learn more about these opportunities. It's really life-changing. And certainly ECOP Africa is going to grab these girls to do something even more powerful within the ECOP program. And I hope that we do. We have so much to learn from all Aisha and Fiona and all the ladies from Mawazo Institute. We're definitely going to keep going this discussion partnership in the background. So thank you so much, Fiona. So now we can move to Aisha. Aisha, you ready? Can I put up your slides?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Sarah.
All right, let's do that. Just click here quickly. Yeah, here. Can you see my screen or not yet?
Not yet.
Not yet. There you go. Share. Sorry, guys, let's just start from the beginning. There you go. All right.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, ECOP Africa. And thank you as well, Dr. Fiona, for that great introduction about what Mawazo does. So I will be just discussing a bit of the status of African women in research. It is quite an extensive research project. So I would definitely, even before I go in, I would definitely implore everyone to give it a read, to give it a look through. I have added the direct link to the report in the chat. So please, in your own time, in your own leisure, please go ahead and take a look at the report. And also, if you have any thoughts, feedback, please feel free to reach out to Mawazo Institute through our social media or through our official channels at any point. Okay, great. So I'll start with a brief introduction. On the next page, please, Sarah, on kind of what the status of African women in research does. So we launched this report at the United States International University Africa, which is based in Nairobi, Kenya, on the 6th of March. So ultimately, this report serves to be an in-depth analysis of the experiences of African women researchers, but particularly those who are pursuing doctoral studies across the continent. We felt that with this report, we wanted to go beyond the statistics. We really wanted to humanize the experiences of researchers by shedding light on the systemic challenges they face. And this includes like the lack of funding, the lack of mentorship opportunities, the challenges to research mobility, whether that's within the continent or outside. It also looked at the ability to collaborate with fellow researchers, again, within the continent or outside of the continent, institutional support, but also some of the most important things like the embodied experiences of what it means to be an African woman on the continent, undertaking research. And at the same time, we really wanted to celebrate resilience and achievements and just the incredible work that African women are doing on the continent. So ultimately, we also wanted this document to advocate for actionable solutions as well and shape the future landscape of African research. We cannot have research on the continent without women at the center of it. So it just serves as a vital resource for informing how we can better support African researchers on the continent. And this is particularly because, as you can see on the screen, we are still, as a continent, lagging behind in how much we are supporting African women in research, but also the access that African women in research have to publications, to positions of leadership, to representation in STEM, but also just across higher learning in Africa. So just to kind of give some context on where we got the data for this report. So this report is based on data collected from the 2023 Mawazo Fellowship Program applications. And I'll talk a little bit more about the demographics soon. But basically, it's the 2023 Mawazo Fellowship Program applications. And with that, there was an accompanying academic needs survey. So this survey asked questions about the institutional questions. For example, how much access do you have within your institution? What are the levels of support you have when it comes to supervision? It also sought to ask about family commitments and all these other things that kind of contribute towards how well you can, to an extent, succeed in your research. So together with these two pieces of critical information, we were able to kind of start to paint a picture of what the status of African women in research looks like today. Next slide, please, Sarah. Just one more back, please. Yes, so the purpose of this report was to really understand who are these women that we are talking about. We're talking about African women in research, and I think I'm probably going to repeat that phrase quite a bit today, but that's exactly it. But who are these women, and are the experiences amorphously one, or are the experiences across the continent different? Because under different circumstances, for example, an African woman doing research in Kenya might have a very different experience to an African woman doing research in West Africa, in Togo, for example. So we really wanted to understand what these maybe nuanced differences look like, but also what fields are they in? What does the trends in research look like? Are women more inclined towards life and health sciences? Is there a spike in physics and mathematics? Trying to understand what exactly the fields look like and how this interacts with funding and all the other elements of undertaking research on the continent. Other things that we looked at is what challenges they face in the course of their research, what is the depth and width of these lived experiences, and this is exactly a bit more of the embodied experience. Like, are you a parent? Are you a mother? Are you also the impact of age, for example? How does your age affect the way in which you're able to access funding, affect the ways in which you can access mentorship and leadership? But also in mind, we also started to think about what recommendations, knowing what we know as Mawazo Institute and what this research is telling us, what can we do? And what recommendations do we have in hand to improve the circumstances for African women in research? Next, please. Yes, so just some of the demographics as I had mentioned. So in total, from the 2023 academic needs surveys, we got 1,445 completed surveys. And you can see the demographics of Eastern Africa, Western Africa, Southern, Central, Northern. We got quite few applications from Northern Africa, but we also got some of those who are outside of Africa, such from Europe, USA, and Asia as well. Next slide, please. And from the Mawazo Fellowship itself, from the actual application, we got 927 submitted applications from the region, with Eastern Africa in the lead, followed by Western Africa, and Southern Africa, and Central Africa, and Northern Africa. With the demographics, before we move on, I also just want to give some sort of granularity to the demographics as well, in regards to the three main rubrics in which we undertook this research, which is the regional differences, the age groups. So we also had some age group categorization, but also additionally, we included caregiving, because we felt like caregiving is a very big indication of how you're able to navigate the world of academia. So those were the kind of the three main criteria in which we looked at this data. So some of the results of that is that among the top countries with the highest number of applicants represented were Kenya at 26%, Nigeria 20%, Ghana 9%, South Africa 7%, Cameroon 6%, and Uganda 6%, accounting for over 74% of the applications. In terms of age distribution, the highest proportion of applicants was represented by the 35 to 39 year age group at 31%. And at some point, I will talk a bit about age in this presentation, followed by the 30 to 34 year age group at 25%. Among the other age groups represented were 40 to 44 years at 18%, 45 to 49 years at 11%, 25 to 29 years at 9%, 50 to 54 years at 5%, and 55 plus at 1%. So the age groups 20 to 24 years, 60 to 64 years, and 65 to 69 years actually attracted 0 applications. So those age groups outside of that, we did not receive any applications. In regards to caregiving status, a significant proportion of applicants reported to being caregivers, where we had 75% of the applicants indicating that they are a primary caregiver. And 230 applicants responded that they were not caregivers. And we will see later that this does have a bit of, I'd say a significant impact in how women are able to navigate the world of academia. Next slide, please. So just very briefly, just to give some context of our theoretical framework. So we decided to go with the Afrofeminist centered lens of analysis. So this just included the work of Nyamenda, who works with the Negro-feminism, but we also looked at this through Kimberly Crenshaw's intersectionality theory, as well as also looking at the data through a very post-colonial theoretical framework to be able to understand, especially being that the university is somewhat of still has very much a foundation of coloniality. We thought that this was very important for us to kind of understand what does it mean to be a woman also in an African institution, and taking into consideration the history of our continent. Next slide, please. Right. So now I will just kind of go straight into the nitty-gritty of the data. Next slide, please. Right. So even before I go into a little bit of the access to funding opportunities, I wanted to speak about something that we found very interesting as we were looking at this, more so to do with thematic areas of research. So while we were undertaking this work, we found that life and health sciences was the most relevant of the thematic areas that African women are undertaking their research. And this, we received 23% of the respondents were within life and health sciences. Followed closely is agriculture and food security, which stood at 22% of the applicants. And the third most popular thematic area is climate change, natural resources, and the environment, standing at 19%. And we also found that with this kind of thematic area spread, there were also some differences and some variants, especially to do with continental spread. So, for example, Central Africa and Eastern Africa had a very strong inclination towards life and health sciences. And for example, agriculture and food security as well, like West Africa had a stronger inclination. West African applicants had a stronger inclination towards agriculture and food security. But then again, for something like climate change and the environment, Central Africa and Southern Africa as well had a stronger inclination towards that thematic group. And I think this also was a very good indication of kind of what are the regional trends when it comes to the areas of interest and the areas of funding as well, because ultimately, which I will speak on in just a few, regional or these thematic influences also had funding had an implication on the choice of thematic areas. So some thematic areas are better funded than others, and hence we saw a little bit more of an inclination in funding in those areas. So now when we just look at funding on a more individual level, a mere 34% of applicants were successful in securing funding or a scholarship. However, there was quite a stark contrast, and a substantial 66% of applicants did not receive any further financial assistance or funding for their PhD research. So Southern Africa particularly had the highest proportion of individuals who were successful in securing funding. However, obviously, this pales in comparison to the proportions that were unsuccessful. But I think it's quite a good indication of the funding models that Southern African universities have, but particularly South Africa has quite strong funding models. Therefore, the funding is equally accessible to most of women undertaking their PhD in South Africa. And as I had mentioned as well, that there is some indication that funding influences the thematic area. So like I'd mentioned, that the most funded thematic areas are climate change, natural resources and the environment, life and health sciences, and agriculture and food security. So these three received from the applications had quite a substantial financial support. But again, this could also be due to their critical role in addressing global and regional challenges that the continent is facing. The least funded thematic areas, according to the Mawazo thematic areas. So Mawazo has 8 thematic areas in which we categorize the fellows who join Mawazo. And to name them all, it's climate change, natural resources and the environment, life and health sciences, agriculture and food security, education and pedagogy, mathematics and physical sciences, business, trade, and the economy. So it's clear that the STEM, the sciences, are better funded compared to other elements, especially in the humanities. So, for example, the least funded are education and pedagogy, business, trade, and the economy. So with this as well, it also indicates a glaring disparity in funding allocation, but potentially due to a perceived lower immediate impact, right? So there's a perception that perhaps the impact of funding business and trade or education is not as critical as perhaps there is a need to fund climate change or to fund life and health sciences. But also this general lack of access to research funding regardless of whether they're in STEM or in the humanities or in the social sciences, had generally a profound impact on the Mawazo applicants. So we saw that 97% reported just a general negative impact of lack of funding on their research work, and only 3% reported no impact. So we saw that while we're undertaking this study, that there are quite the impact of no funding is quite far reaching and beyond even just the classroom or beyond the lab, that this also had quite personal impact, because women were likely to also choose to remain in lower paying jobs that are less economically impactful, but because they provide a certain level of security. And this also then perpetuates the cycle of underrepresentation in women in the sciences or women in academia in general. And again, just continues the cycle of limited access to resources and the limited access to opportunities for African women. I do want to state that something that was also very important that we found out is that 61% of the applicants that we received are currently funding their research using their own personal savings, and only 39 are relying on other means to fund their research. And this is grants, this is also loans from banks, etc. So, but this is especially the case for those who are older. So those who are perhaps above 45 and into their 50s were more likely to fund their research out of their own pocket than they would apply for grants or apply for any type of funding for their research work. So there's a very big indication that for older women, it is more so about the personal of wanting to do the research, but also because of age, most likely they have moved past their caregiving age bracket, and they're now able to kind of focus on their own research. Maybe they've saved money and can now wholly focus on their own research and only be, I guess, dependent on themselves. Next slide, please. Yes, so this is what I just discussed about the funding opportunities and the top 3 that are most funded according to the thematic area. Next slide, please. Right, so this is also a very interesting section of the research that we did that came to research mobility. And when we were trying to define research mobility, we decided to kind of keep it intra-African. So what is your ability to travel to be able to move for a conference, to be able to go to maybe undertake your experiment somewhere else? But we also did find out that a lot of the movement is, of course, unfortunately, moving outside of the continent as well, to be able to maybe undertake specific experiments that can only be taken in certain labs outside of the continent, because most institutions maybe do not have the ability to host such necessary requirements for experiments and etc. But regardless of that, we did find that 79 of applicants are undertaking their PhD in their home country, and only 21% of applicants are undertaking their PhD in another country. And even more interestingly enough, less than 1% have conducted their masters outside of the continent. So it was great to see that there is definitely an extension of African women and a retention of African women staying on the continent, undertaking their masters, and then proceeding to do their PhDs on the continent, vis-a-vis choosing to leave the continent and undertake their PhD outside. And Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa at 24%, 19%, and 15% emerged as the countries with the highest number of applicants undertaking their PhD in their home country. So most Kenyans are doing the PhDs in their own country, Nigerians are doing PhDs in Nigeria, and South Africans are doing PhDs in South Africa. But also had the highest numbers of applicants of other African countries moving to these countries to undertake their PhD. So for East Africa, Kenya received the highest number of other African nationalities doing their PhDs in Kenya, and Nigeria for West Africa likewise, and South Africa the same as well. However, what was also quite revealing is that South Africa had the most diverse PhD applicants in terms of nationalities. So 16 nationalities or 16 countries represented across all the African Union regions. So from the applicants, we saw a huge number of the PhD candidates are doing their PhDs or have chosen to do their PhDs in a Southern African institution. So also we saw that we also discussed about the ability to collaborate. So how is it, what is the ability of an African woman in research to collaborate on academic work, to publish together? And we saw that there was a high impact on collaboration and struggling. There was a very big challenge with African women in research being able to access collaboration platforms, being able to collaborate with other African researchers, or even just researchers in general. And we found that women in the age groups of 35 to 50 especially experience the highest impact of struggling to collaborate with other researchers, with 95% of the applicants also aged between that time reporting to struggle to collaborate. And 93% of those aged 40 to 49 reported an impact of struggling to collaborate with other researchers on their PhD work. However, younger age groups such as 35 and below were more likely to experience no impact on their ability to collaborate in research. And probably this is because at that age group, you most likely have less primary caregiving responsibilities. You're a lot more mobile. Also, maybe in regards to being tech savvy and being able to communicate online more frequently, most likely you are able to collaborate and to be able to commit to collaborations at a younger age group. Next slide, please. Right. So with academic support, it was quite a big section for us because it could mean many things. But we decided to look specifically on the impact of a lack of mentorship and career guidance. So in this regard, we saw that older women, especially women aged 50 and above, faced more challenges on their ability to get a mentor that they felt was the right fit for them. And we also saw that generally with all respondents, only about 38% said that they were impacted by a lack of a mentor. However, we did find that about 52% of the African women we surveyed were not impacted by unsupportive supervisors, which for us was kind of interesting because we felt like, okay, 52% not being impacted by unsupportive supervisors is quite positive. However, when we're now kind of looking a little bit more at our qualitative data, because we undertook some interviews with our Mawazo alumni, it kind of told a very different story of what it means to have unsupportive supervisors. So I want to just read a quote that I pulled from the report describing one of Mawazo's alumni and the challenges she had with her supervisor. So she holds a PhD in computer science, and she described this experience of not completing her PhD after 4 years. So she says, I started my PhD journey in 2014 at an East African university while I was already married. My area of focus was information technology, and I pursued this degree from 2014 to 2019. Although I successfully completed the requirements of the PhD, I did not graduate due to issues with my supervisor. As I approached the completion of my studies, persistent problems with my supervisors arose, ultimately leading to the withdrawal of support in 2019. This left me in a challenging situation, not knowing what to do next. My aim was to always earn a PhD and contribute positively towards supporting women through my work. Consequently, in 2020, I enrolled in a different university for a new PhD in computer science, and I completed the program and graduated in June 2024. So what this quote tells us is really there can be such significant challenges when it comes to receiving the right support in regards to supervise, particularly from what the research showed us. If you have more than one supervisor, a lot of African women researchers will face conflicting feedback. There will be a lot of issues of maybe the thesis not being approved, maybe chapters not being read, and this constantly extends the amount of time that it takes for African women researchers to complete their PhDs. But also there's a mental health element that comes into this, where there's a lot of stress, a lot of stress, but also financial repercussions of this as well, that leads to even more stress, because undertaking a PhD is very costly, whether that's emotionally, whether that's financially, whether that is mentally, whether that is spiritually as well. So this kind of experience is what we really wanted to highlight, that yes, sometimes the statistics might say 52% said that they had no problem with their supervisors, or they did not have unsupportive supervisors, but the reality and the embodied experiences can say a very different thing. And I thought this was very important to highlight, that the experience of an individual sometimes does not always speak to the data, but it's important that we should highlight it nonetheless. Next slide, please. Right, so this now kind of leads to exactly what I was speaking about in regards to what are these more embodied, gendered experiences that women experience and women go through as they're undertaking their PhD. So in regard to the gendered experiences, we kind of looked at this in twofold, where we kind of wanted to understand, what does it mean to be a woman? Are there experiences of misogyny or sexism in your departments, or in the lab, or any type of, in any type of academic space that you exist in? But we also wanted to look at this on the more familiar level, looking at the impact of family commitments on PhD candidates' ability to undertake their research. So most women researchers did strongly express a conflict between domestic and family duties, with 82% recording that family commitments had an impact on their research time, whilst 18% stated that they experienced no impact on their academic research time. But we also found out that caregiver status especially influences the impact of struggling to find time for research. So among those who are caregivers, 87% of them reported an impact, while in stark comparison, only 67% of non-caregivers reported experiencing an impact on their ability to find time to conduct research as a consequence of their family commitments. 33% of non-caregivers reported no impact at all, compared to a very low 13% of caregivers who said no impact at all. So this is quite a good indication that there is a very strong need to have more support for African women who are undertaking their research, because a significant amount of them are primary caregivers. And we also, when we say primary caregivers, we also do not just mean being a mother to children, but we also understand, and we looked at this with the understanding that across the continent, there are elements of Black tax, where you are just not a caregiver to your children, but most likely a caregiver to parents, most likely a caregiver to extended family members, most likely there are other family commitments that you have. Most likely African women are also community leaders. So this does not mean as well just specifically being, someone with children, but also looking into encompassing, again, that very intersectional aspect of what it means to be a woman, that most likely you are doing a lot more and a lot significant more care work and labor in the household. So it was very interesting for us to see what those numbers look like, because it's very important for us to really understand what these caregiving responsibilities look like, but also how can we mitigate the impact that they have on African women undertaking research. And I think it's just, and I think you can kind of see it there that younger women under 30 were the least affected by family commitments, but of course, most affected by family commitments were those between 35 and 39, who are now kind of stepping into their into their caregiving role, maybe marriage, also having children, very young children. So that's kind of the time as well that we also notice that there's quite a bit of attrition rate where a lot of women also end up leaving their PhDs, whether it's because of financial or responsibilities, that it just becomes a bit too much and a strain on physical health and mental health as well. So we also looked at, again, the kind of misogyny, sexism, the everyday experiences of being an African woman in an academic space. And we saw that 30% indicated that they experienced an impact of misogyny and sexism in their academic space. And I want to also read another quote by one of our fellows, because again, I do believe their stories tell a lot more sometimes than what statistics can do. So a Mawazo fellow recounts her experience as a Muslim woman in an East African university of her colleagues attempting to unveil her and remove her hijab. In this university, there are many challenges. As a Muslim woman, there have been instances where people have tried to remove my veil to see, to touch my hair, and to check its length. I often say, no, please respect me as someone's wife. As an academic, I assert my rights, and as a woman, I uphold my dignity. I should be treated with the respect I deserve. So again, I think just those type of stories really can tell us so much about what the conditions are like for African women who are doing their PhDs on the continent, and really understand the different identities that women have. But how can we also, again, mitigate, and how can we be aware and raise awareness that these are some of the very unfortunate experiences that women have on the continent as they're attempting to do their PhDs. Next slide, please. Yes, so this is just the quote that I had just read, and yeah, the impact of sexism and misogyny as a researcher. And again, this sexism and misogyny is often what then can sometimes also lead to a lack of motivation. It can lead to a lack of desire to complete PhDs. It can lead to dropout rates. And unfortunately, it can lead to research not being completed that could potentially have an impact on and change the continent. So yes, so lastly, I just want to conclude with this gendered experiences. And we did find out that for a lot of the applicants that we received, that the primary motivation for applying for the Mawazo Fellowship was a lack of funding, which I think Dr. Fiona stated quite well, that yes, funding is that big thing that unfortunately seems to be clouding a lot of PhD work from going through. But applicants also cited financial constraints related to gendered family responsibilities, such as raising children in a single-parent household, caring for children living with disabilities, and assuming guardianship for children within kin networks. So we also found that the effects of gender responsibilities on women PhD applicants have a long-term impact on their education and economic status. Next slide, please. So here we are. I was only able to touch on some of the main things and the things that we thought were quite interesting for this session. But just to conclude, I think it's quite clear that African women researchers face quite a precarious situation in regards to gender stereotyping, the lack of adequate institutional support, the absence of training, mentorship, and career guidance. And there is a strong need for attention from policymakers and academic institutions to really focus on African women researchers and listen to their needs and what exactly they need to be able to complete their PhDs. And lastly, of course, women are the most critical actors, right, in creating sustainable solutions, and should be included, because ultimately African women researchers are very cognizant of the environments in which they're in. And a lot of the time, the work that they are doing, which was also a very big indication, was that a lot of the work that they're doing speaks to personal experiences, speaks to their immediate environment, and they're developing solutions that will work towards impacting their immediate environment and the world around them. Next slide, please. So these are just a few recommendations. I will not go through all of them. They're quite many, but I will not go through all of them. But I think we just also felt that with the report, we needed some recommendations to go forward in regards to the different stakeholders, such as African women in research, how to bring strong community, also higher education institutions and universities, what policies can they implement, how can they lend themselves better to African women doing research, but also with mentorship programs, what systems are there within community, professors and lecturers in the academy, mentoring young women, and also, of course, publications and publishing. How can we stop with exclusion in publication practices that, that could create financial barriers for African women researchers to be able to access publishing more? And next slide, please. Yes, and of course, our governments, how can we pull them in to be more cognizant of the experiences of African women researchers? How are they making things easier for those who are living with disabilities or those who have invisible disabilities as well? And how can they reduce this very ableist, very masculine space that sometimes African universities harbor? Also looking into the media and how can the media also begin to push African women's researchers, push African women as thought leaders in their fields and publish them and engage with them and, reveal the experiences of African women researchers so that everyone can know this is the circumstances and the situation. And of course, funders as well, they play a very, very critical role in regards to African women in research, in regards to getting research funded and who gets funded. So it's really so critical for them to have a strong understanding of what it means to be an African woman researcher and build programs and implementation policies that really accelerate the work that African women are doing on the continent. I will stop there. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Aisha. Wow, that's such an amazing report. I'm so glad that ECOP Africa invited Mawazo to briefly talk about the results of this report. I really recommend that every one of you share the reports and discuss these results openly within your country, with your community of girls, and also not only ladies, but anyone that supports gender inclusion and gender equality in all spheres. It's such a good report. Thank you so much, Aisha, for navigating us through all this. It's such an enriched presentation and discussion. Well, I'm gonna now invite Melissa, Dr. Melissa, please, to give her own feedback about the presentation, the results from our Mawazo Institute. Aisha and Fiona also welcome to interfere. Natalie from ECOP program, our communications coordinator, is also welcome to interact here in our discussion about the report results from our Mawazo Institute. Thank you so much, Melissa.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation and also the discussion that we're having. It's absolutely fascinating how the research has been done and the conclusions that's been made. And there's many, many parallels that I can see within my own life and my own research journey, funding journey. There are so many. So it's really wonderful. And we spoke earlier about wondering about men participating, and I think it's just so important. And thank you to the men who are in this chat specifically, because the more men actually also know what's going on between African women, between women in general, and the biases and challenges that they face, that's where they can help challenge those biases and promote equality. So for understanding the facts and understanding what women have been going through, are still going through, that's very important for men to participate or get involved, or at least listen to what we have to say. So it's a fantastic initiative that Mawazo has started, and definitely not the end. So congratulations to them. So just with regards to my experiences also, and thank you, Sarah, for inviting me and also giving the wonderful introduction. Just to say, I do work on mainly marine invertebrates, but my specialization is looking into marine bryozoans. This is a very specialized niche. I'm one of 2 experts, at least in sub-Saharan Africa, that's actively involved in bryozoology. Bryozoans are a small microscopic aquatic colonial organism. And they're found in all oceans, especially in Africa too, of course, but we know very little about our African diversity. And this is where I came in with my doctoral studies within the museum space at the ECOP South African Museum, and really started getting an interest in bryozoans because of what they can tell us. It was very interesting that they mentioned natural sciences are one of the few or the least one of the least fields that some women go into, and it really speaks to climate change research and also medical research that are obviously a top priority. Being an African, we can obviously compare that and parallel with that because people need medical care, they need solutions, they need climate friendly solutions, they need there's so many things. So I can understand why those fields are more focused on and more funding are in those fields. But within natural sciences, in which I specialize in, there's definitely a need for Africans to start taking ownership also of what we have in our own country. One of the projects that I was involved with last year in Germany basically is trying to pilot this with bryozoans, because what happened, especially with a lot of our or the countries that had colonial people come in, is that the researchers came from all over the world and they studied our specimens and they took it back with them to Europe, to wherever, and when they died, they normally donated this to their home museum. So we're sitting with lots of our voucher and important historic specimens from Africa, sitting in these museums, gathering dust, and the only people that are interested in those are Africans. The Europeans are not likely to be interested in the specimens that are just sitting there now. And one of the projects that, as I mentioned, I started last year is to basically digitize and image the bryozoan specimens. In this case, it was a small collection that I focused on just to see how it's going to go. But I looked at the material in the Berlin Museum, and what I already saw just from seeing the images already is that there's one new species, there's one misidentified species. Well, there's a couple actually, but one potential new species already from this one exercise that I did. So I'm hoping after publishing the work that I can try and motivate for more funding so that we can actually include many more marine invertebrate taxa, not only bryozoans. To basically try and digitize our own specimens so that we have access to them, digital access, so that we don't have to physically go to these European museums, pay all that money to stay there for a couple of weeks. It's very impractical for us as Africans. So that's one thing I'd like to mention there. With regards to the funding, the other funding that I received to go to Germany was actually done through Dr. Anthony Ndao, who's the coordinator for ECOP. So I'm very excited that I am speaking here today because he helped me get into contact with the host institution in Germany and with the host supervisor, and things just went great from there, and I was able to go there for 3 months. Part of my decision to go was because the host supervisor said I can bring my toddler along. At the time, he was 2.5 years old, and in my mind, going for 3 months wasn't an option for me to leave him the side in South Africa. So the fact that he actually supported me and said I can bring my toddler and my mother-in-law, who looked after him, to go was definitely my reason for wanting to take part. So there's another childcare type of nuance there, and paralleled with the research that has been found with the Mawazo Institute. And yeah, so it was my mother-in-law's first time overseas as well. So it really was a fantastic experience for us. And career-wise, it was amazing. With regards to grants, I note that many women in this report mentioned the fact that childcare or having a child was one of the critical experiences for not being able to either receive funding or being able to do the research. There's many grants that are out
82%
there.
said, sorry, Melissa, just to recap some data here from the report. So according to the survey from Mawazo, they caught that 82% of the respondents of the survey said that family commitment has an impact in their own research. So that's a lot.
That's a lot. It really makes a difference when people like this funding grant that I was able to go supports the fact that you want your kid. You don't have to explain. You don't have to make all these different excuses. It's I want my kid with me, point blank. Um, and yeah, so
Especially if you
again,
are the only sole caregiver, which is a reality that's quite common in Africa. So that's really challenging how you can manage to be a researcher, a mother, and support your family. You're the only financial supporter of that family. So to combine all that, it's without funding, it's really, really like an example of resilience. How these women
definitely.
can go through a PhD and overcome all the challenges surrounding the PhD, plus the pressure of the mental stress that we get into that PhD stages that we all go through, regardless of the sex. We all go through that if you do your PhD and also masters. It's just really too much for a woman, especially African woman. With at this stage, most of the African countries don't provide such support for African women, and I think
Exactly.
that's what I would like to see in our discussion here: how we can motivate institutions within ocean sciences or not, but to embrace that, to being more inclusive, to provide, enable this change, the institutional changes to accommodate these needs of African women, so we can, have a new generation of ocean leaders, of ocean professionals, and also whatever they're doing, not only related to the oceans, but to thrive as a professional and don't give up on the way, because what really makes us sad about it is that there are so many women that are trying to get their PhD, but they leave it out on the way. They give up on the way. They tried, but then they give up with so many things going on. So I think we need to give the voice for this African woman alongside to Mawazo Institute to reach out to institutions, especially universities across the continent, to embrace that change in the needs of these African women, to facilitate things for African women. Yeah.
Definitely. And you spoke of, well, the Mawazo Institute also spoke about grants. And I was very curious to know if the Mawazo Institute's grant actually, or the fellowship actually includes childcare, because I think that's definitely something that's missing with many other grants. I was very fortunate enough to have gotten a National Geographic grant for research that I did in South Africa. And in their budget, okay, so basically I proposed my project, and the same, I think a month later, I found out I was pregnant. And only when they let me know that I got the grant, I then told them, oh, I'm pregnant, I'm gonna have to change some timelines and things. And they said, well, guess what? Childcare is included in the budget. So re-manage your budget, readjust it, and add childcare to it. It was such a huge relief to have that first year of my child's life to be covered for. And I think that's such an important part of us making the decisions to partake in research, whether our families will be sorted. You know, there was a comment also with regards to the supervisors and mentorship and guidance. What I've experienced in my life is that as much as many of the supervisors are established researchers, they are good at what they do. Not all of them can adjust for the guidance that some women need, or the amount of guidance that some women need. And I'm definitely one of them who had some lack of guidance through my supervisor relationships throughout the years. And I've always told myself I don't want to be that way. Now I'm a supervisor myself, as many other women here can attest to. It takes a lot out of you to supervise as properly as you can. You don't want to have a half-assed job. You want to do it well, and it takes time, and it takes time to discuss things with your student. It takes time to coordinate everything, and there's definitely some gaps there in with regards to how much we can guide them, and how much time that takes from us, because all the time that we spend trying to coordinate and also guide them is also spent away from the research that you do. So there's that type of guidance and support type of discussions we can have there too. I don't know how much time I have left. Can I still introduce the project that I'm doing?
Yes, that's what I was going to say. I think
Okay.
Fiona and Aisha can answer to your question about the child support in the Q&A session. We can start with that first question, and then I think everybody wants to hear about that.
Okay.
And just to add on, yes, I think I'm just going to suggest briefly, if you're applying for a grant or fellowship, whatever, if they don't mention child support, write to it. Put on it, add to the budget. This is the way for us as a woman to make a change, to make them people are like, oh, we didn't think about that, the funders. But maybe they'll consider. Most of them nowadays are considering. I also had an experience where I said, okay, can I add childcare? And they said, oh, I'm so sorry, Sarah, we didn't take into consideration for the women applicants. So, so there is a window depending on what you're dealing with, who are you dealing with, of the funders and sponsors, to take into consideration your needs. So just pay attention to that. But yes, Melissa, please, you are welcome to talk a little bit about in the really cool survey, and actually it's like a challenging survey to reveal the contribution of women within the ECOP South Africa Museum in Cape Town. I'm just gonna briefly talk about the museum because I'm also a research associate there at the ECOP Museum in the Marine Biology Collection. So that's why I met Melissa. That's where we met, and from time to time we see each other there. And so just to let you know, so ECOP Museums is completing now 200 years old this year, which means they're having a big 200 anniversary celebrations planned for this year. That's why Melissa started to undertake this survey to understand, okay, but who are these women at the museum? How do they contribute at the museum? Who are behind the scenes of all these celebrations in terms of women that we never mentioned? And also to give an overview about the leadership scenario within the museum throughout these 200 years, to see if they were represented, how they contribute in terms of research, not only to marine biology, but all the departments within the ECOP Museums. So that's ECOP Museums Natural History, right? We are talking about the Natural History Museum here, not all the museums within the ECOP brand, because ECOP is a big brand of many museums across South Africa. But she's doing the research for the South African Museum, ECOP, which is based in Cape Town, the Natural History, basically, museum. So yeah, please, Melissa, talk a little bit about your research and the plans to conduct that survey.
Yeah.
Maybe you can also talk with Fiona and Aisha if they're keen to contribute somehow or give some inputs at the certain stage of the survey. That would be very great to hear that. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you for that short introduction with regard to the museum itself. But throughout history, many women scientists have been ignored or denied credit. And this is basically a phenomenon called the Matilda effect. So this was named after Matilda Gage, an American woman in the 19th century. She was a feminist, and she basically described this effect because she experienced it herself. And this is basically a systemic bias against women in science, especially. And in the museum sector, especially in the earlier days, there was likely not likely, the Matilda effect was definitely very much in play. But it's not only the museum sector. We've seen so many stories come out from Africa, not African, but women in general, but then also the African women coming out much later in these years, in the last in the last century itself, showing how women have actually played a role behind the scenes. And this is why it's so important for us to highlight these women, especially within the museum space. And from our literature review, it showed that there's so little research that has been done of women in science and women in the museum space within South Africa. So we're literally scratching a big wound at this moment. And the one chapter that we are going to have published later this year is basically looking at the Matilda effect, how that played a role in how women in science came into the museum and the history of that. And then we also profiled of the pioneering women that worked at the museum, where 3 of the 9 women, they at the time was in the early 1900s. They didn't marry or they didn't have kids. And all I can think of is how difficult it must have been for them to have stuck through their guns and actually do what they are passionate about, which was science, whether they were doing the field work, whether they were doing the lab work, whether they were doing the write-up of the papers, they ended up not getting credited for the work, and they were just happy doing what they wanted to do. So this project is hopefully going to enhance or improve our own ability to show the importance of how women in science have played a role in scientific contributions, and also how different patriarchal norms, which are public and private, because we have the public one where it's normalized that women don't do dangerous field work, and then we also have private patriarchal norms where the woman needs to stay at home and obviously have raise the kids and do the dishes and all that type of stuff. So there are different patriarchal norms, and it's still very much alive within many communities. But it's something we can all address, and we can all work together in terms of what you stand for as a woman and what you see yourself doing. My whole plan was I wanted to be a marine biologist, and I didn't want to be an average one. I wanted to be a fantastic one. For me to get there is a different story, and it takes a lot of effort and time to actually get there, especially if you have a kid and you have to run a household. So yeah, that's basically what the project is in a nutshell. I don't want to take too much time because I know we have
Yes,
some
thank you
Q&A
so much,
still.
Melissa. That's very
Thank you.
interesting. And I actually would like to, Melissa, to give us some up-to-date after this webinar about the process of the workshops, the wide ECOP Africa node. So those who are interested in the subject in terms of museums, natural history museums, especially in the continent, but also especially South Africa, to get in touch with you. You're also welcome, Melissa, to drop your email if anyone would like to follow you on LinkedIn, whatever, to follow you the survey. But just quickly before we move on with Melissa still, I would like just to say goodbye to Fiona because she has to rush out. And now I would like everybody to say also thanks to her. What amazing work you're doing, Fiona. Thank you so much for being able to be here with us. And we're going to carry on with Aisha representing Mawazo. But thank you so much, Fiona. And I hope that we can get in touch soon to discuss other things of this upcoming partnership between ECOP Africa and Mawazo Institute. Thank you so much. Bye. All right. Okay. So Melissa, again, so sorry to have to cut you a little bit, but you're welcome to Melissa to drop your email. I see that you put on the chat. So who is interested to get to know a little bit more about this survey at the ECOP Museums in terms of the women role at the ECOP Museum, please be in touch with Melissa. And we also open up the channel here for Melissa to share any of her results within the ECOP Africa node. You're very welcome, Melissa, to reach out to us, myself and Natalie, anytime. Thank you so much. But now, I think finally everybody wants to raise your hands and throw your questions to me, to Melissa, to Aisha, especially, who's presenting the results from Mawazo. But the first question that also Melissa asked was about the fellowship, Mawazo Fellowship for mentorship and for the African women, and if there is any assistance with child assistance or any kind of similar scheme or mechanism that we can take advantage of this fellowship. So yes, Aisha, you're welcome to answer to that first question while everybody is getting ready. I'm just going to ask you please to raise your hand, and then I will allow you to to make a question to the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. So yes, actually, Melissa, we do. So we, as part of our funding, especially for alumni and the fellowships, there are cycles of funding that they can apply for. And this is perhaps if they have projects or conferences to attend to. So, for example, if they have a conference to attend to, we will finance their transport with a caregiver of their choice, whether this is their mother, whether this is a nanny, whether this is the husband who will be there to support with the caregiving. We provide funding for that. We also have certain discretionary funds as well that in case of emergency, they can access for funding as well for caregiving practices that they need to undertake. When we are now going to be having an in-person onboarding, and we are now at 60 fellows who will be joining us in May, and we are providing them with the option for caregiving, to bring their children and to bring a caregiver for their children. So yes, long story.
That's amazing. Yes. That's really amazing. I'm also a mother of a little boy, very naughty little boy. And but at the same time, no matter if they well behave or not, we always want to take our kids wherever we go, especially during conferences, during meetings, they are abroad, because it's a unique opportunity for them to experience something different and to get to know different cultures. You know, we all understand as a mother, father, that's providing experience to our kids is the most valuable thing, because that's how they're gonna grow up. That's when they're gonna become ourselves. They're gonna build this personality, right? So yeah, I feel I actually, in my opinion, as a researcher, I also feel like it's such a big challenge to find this type of opportunities there. Childcare is already one of the budget topics that you can include. Sometimes you have to explain why. You have to prove that you have a child to request that. And more importantly, in terms of conferences, I never see any conference where they have, like, for example, child care during the conference. Sometimes you have reached this Wyoming symposiums and all that. I have never been to the Wyoming Symposium, by the way, so I don't know, but if they do provide that, but that's a tip for you, Wyoming Symposium. We are happy to pay extra in the registration fee if you can take our kids with, at least partially, during the conference, so we feel safe that they are gonna be in a safe place while we are doing our presentations, while we are networking, while we are in environments that we feel safe, not only for ourselves but for them too. So just a tip for upcoming regional and big international and multilateral conference on the way to Africa. Yeah, but I do have another question for Aisha. It's actually in terms of the survey. If Mawazo Institute had a chance to get the data in terms of domestic violence for the applicants, I know it's a subject that's, in my opinion, it's a little bit not very open in the African context. There is a lot of bias still on open this subject up, especially in terms of researchers. And I just wanted to hear if Mawazo had a chance to get the sensitivity and also the opportunity to understand what's the scenario for those African women researchers in terms of domestic violence.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for that question. So brief answer I will say is no, because we also understand the sensitivity, just like you have mentioned, when it comes to gender-based violence or intimate partner violence. But particularly, and I think this is also reflected a little bit in the sexism and misogyny questions as well, where I got the sense when looking at the data that it will be difficult to kind of see the honesty in the statistics, because we know how sensitive these topics are. But also, I think in regards to, like, for example, the misogyny, the way me and you might read misogyny might not be the same, for example, as how someone else in a very different cultural context might read misogyny. Right?
Mhm.
Oh, it'll just be like, that's just how my society is. That's just how the men do things. That's just my culture, my tradition, etc. So I think for us, this is our first one. And these are now kind of like the things we're ruminating with, like, maybe we did not phrase the misogyny in the, we are phrasing it from a very feminist understanding of what misogyny is, right? And maybe there's
Yeah.
a way we could adjust the question that could lead to people understanding more about what misogyny is, maybe even about gender-based violence. So no, for this one, we did not touch on the subject of gender-based violence, but I will say that we had a section in the survey that kind of said like additional information, which was open, and allowed anyone to kind of write whatever they wanted to. And this is actually where now a lot of these more embodied experiences were written. This is where a lot of the applicants would write things like, hey, I'm a single mother. I'm also bringing up my brother's children, and my parents live with me, and this is my financial situation. These are the circumstances I'm in. And for me, again, because I'm more trained in qualitative, I found that just like, wow, this is kind of where the juice is, because this additional information now really provides the embodied experience that we are discussing. And I do think for sure in future versions of this report, and as we go into reviewing this next cycle and of cohort, we did adjust the questions accordingly with kind of the feedback we got as a team, but also with us reviewing it as a team as well. So with the feedback we received and our own internal review processes, we've now rethought a little bit of what we want to get out of this second cycle of the report.
Yeah, that would be great to have that, channel open a little bit within the Mawazo Institute as the survey, because if you do have good numbers responding, the respondent giving you feedback about that, perhaps will be good option for Mawazo Institute also to open up a tool where you can support in that way for these women, because again, we are facing here challenges in terms of motherhood, research, mental health, and other pressures that we
Physical health.
know. So you see lack of funding, and on top of that, maybe those women are falling within the domestic violence context.
Yes.
And that's it's even worse. And I just to clarify here for our audience, when we talk about domestic violence, we're not talking about physical violence, okay? Domestic violence includes mental and psychological abuse as well, emotional and psychological abuse, which are different things, and plus, the physical violence. So, I would like to certainly to get some of these more open up, discussed within the ECOP program as well, not to review things or nothing like that, but to enable these women to have a channel and a kind of support somehow, or at least to facilitate them to find the support. But anyway, so in terms of the funding, that's 66% of the respondents that said they didn't have funding at all, meaning that they just got from their own pocket somehow. It's impressive as well, and I believe that's something that's not only related to African women, but all the Africans who want to be researchers, they also struggle maybe to become because we are women, we struggle a little bit more for many other reasons, but that lack of funding for research and for studies, it's one of the biggest challenges that we also see within the ECOP Africa. We ran a little bit of a survey last year, and our members also highlighted that to us. That's one of the main problems. One thing that I just wanted to interesting thing that I realized from your presentation, Aisha, and the status, the report itself, is that when you mention about the main thematic areas, which are natural sciences and life sciences and health sciences, plus climate change, plus what's the third one? Science and health sciences, climate change, and I think
agriculture and food security.
Agriculture, yes. These are main thematic areas of your service falls very well within the broad interdisciplinary field of ocean sciences, meaning that we see that all these women are working somehow relating to ocean sciences. And that's very interesting because maybe the majority of these women that were part of the survey are now related to ocean sciences. They want to become, ocean leaders somehow. And that's very interesting. And more interesting than I thought on your results is the low mobility subjects within the continent, but highlighting those countries with the highest rate of mobility, but also in-country PhD students, which were Nigeria, Kenya, and South Africa. Nigeria, within the ECOP Africa node, is the country with the highest number of members, ECOP members registered in our database, with over 200 members. Kenya is second. South Africa is not yet our official node. We are in the process of launching the node soon, officialize the nodes and launch the nodes and endorse a node. But I assume that South Africa will become one of the strongest and the highest in terms of registered members within the ECOP program, which is quite interesting. So you see, this reflects also in our database as the ECOP program of these countries being perhaps the main three countries in the continent that can support and welcome these researchers. So it's very, very nice to see this overlap. You see, very good. But I would like to welcome our audience. Please don't be shy. Raise your hand. Yes, Melissa, you can speak.
Hi there. So just a question, Aisha. I would be interested to know how many of the women actually conceptualize their own research project versus an existing research project. And if their own work actually had to do with, for instance, natural sciences, something that they are maybe interested in, versus an existing one that is within the common climate change research, agricultural research, and were there successful grantees on either of those projects, whether it's own research, existing research?
Thank you so much for that, Melissa. So when I was looking at the data, one of the things that definitely comes up is, like I had mentioned, the influence of funding and how the funding is coming. And I think, for example, within the Kenyan context, for example, the government has something called like Vision 2030. And this kind of highlights the main elements within, for example, research such as STEM, where they're kind of focusing on the research. So unfortunately, there is a bit of external influence that comes with whether they're doing kind of their own research or whether it's kind of influenced to an extent. And another thing that also came up in the research is the supervisor master student relationship. Right. So for a lot of the women that, again, that even interviewed, it's kind of like their PhDs came through their master supervisor who had funding and was said, come with me onto this project, right? Which I think is very common also in Southern African institutions, in Kenyan institutions as well, where they kind of bring in master students. Especially if they're younger, they tend to bring them in. So I did see a little bit of that influence where, yes, it might be their own project, but it serves a bigger project just because of how the funding systems come and because of the influences of supervisors. I do think older applicants, by virtue, they're paying for themselves, they're doing this thing, there's a lot more of, I'm doing this research because I love it. There's a lot more freedom, let me say, that they have to kind of take the research and do it because maybe they've had a dream of getting a PhD and they really just wanted to answer this minute question. So they have a lot more flexible and a lot more freedom to do the research for research sake, to say. But younger researchers and those especially who are seeking funding, unfortunately, there was an idea that they are slightly more influenced by virtue of funding.
Thank you, Aisha. I'm gonna please open the room for our audience now to interact with the speakers. Please, guys and ladies, please raise your hand if you want to place your question. You can also just write in the chat if you're a little bit shy. We are all fellows here. We're all friends. So don't be worried to be shy. And please, let's just give a few minutes for if someone wants to place your question. Anyone from the audience? No? Natalie. Yes, Natalie.
Hi, I would love to ask a question if there's time, because this has just been such a amazing opportunity to hear things that, have never really come into my consciousness before. And because the ECOP program is part of the Decade of Ocean Science, I was just wondering, has the Mawazo Institute had any kind of synergies with the decade, and do you see opportunities for really integrating what you're finding and hoping to, the decade is all about creating transformative change. So like, this is what you're talking about. How can the decade enable the work that you're doing, and how can we support your work to become more recognized through the decade?
Thank you, Natalie. Thank you for that. I mean, currently, even just internally, Mawazo is kind of going through also new strategic planning for the next couple of 5 years. And these are kind of the questions we're grappling with in regards to what has changed, what has not changed. And I think for a lot of, especially like gender studies and women's work, unfortunately, not a lot has changed. And in the report, there's a bit of a literature review that I do on African women in research, and how we can say, okay, to an extent, the research being done on African women in research, most of the time, research has been Western looking, experiences of women in the Western world. To an extent, maybe experiences of Black women in Western institutions, in American institutions. But then now, when it kind of comes down to African women in research, it starts to become less and less and less. Within the South African context, there's actually quite a lot of research being done in that, especially when looking at it, particularly within the nexus of race and gender. A lot of work has been kind of done in looking at it in that way. But when we kind of now look towards Eastern Africa and Western Africa, the research starts to become a little few and far in between. And Mawazo has been in existence for about 7 years. And this is the first year we've kind of done this report, but we do have previous cohorts. So I think for me, the way I would see it is that even before I start to maybe pick up on the next cohort, and while the next cohort data analysis is ongoing, I think it'd be very interesting to kind of see behind what has the data looked like, even if it's not specifically for publication purposes, but what do have the previous Mawazo cohorts look like? Because for context, the first cohort Mawazo had was, I think, purely Kenyan, if I'm not mistaken. And then we've kind of grown like Kenya and East Africa. Now we're continental. And now this new cohort of 60, we have a very strong focus on Francophone, which is new. While we did have a few Francophone fellows, we've really taken a conscious decision to be like, okay, Anglophone is kind of existing in this bubble between Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa, and the usual English-speaking countries. But now we're kind of thinking, okay, maybe there's something happening in Francophone that actually speaks against everything that we've discussed today. Maybe they are doing more, the thematic areas of interest are something else. Maybe their experiences of academia is something completely different. So for sure, I think it's important for us to kind of do a decade in review, but especially a decade in review, also looking at SDGs, because the SDGs, we only have, I think 4 or 5 years now. And I think it's quite clear, probably things are worse off maybe than they were when the SDGs were put in place. And I think it would be important to also see, because for a lot of what I think we fall mostly in like SDG 17, SDG 11, if I'm not mistaken. So it would be very interesting to also see, in regards to the SDGs, when it comes to innovation, when it comes to gender, when it comes to education, the SDGs that Mawazo kind of falls under, where are the gaps? Okay, 5 years from now, we might not achieve all SDGs, but what is the root of what's missing? And how can maybe the way in which we look at our cohort, and even the way in which we're looking at this research, kind of speak to that gap, and speak to why we've not achieved the SDG, but also speak to, I think, the decade in review.
Thank you so much, Aisha. Natalie, any feedback or